I never thought I'd be the guy sitting across from his best friend in a crowded coffee shop, nervously sipping a latte as he drops the words, "I had this dream about you," like it was the most casual thing in the world. And yet, there he was. Mark, my roommate and closest friend for the past 3 years, grinning like he'd just won a bet or something. Except the way his eyes held a kind of vulnerability I hadn't seen before made me realize this wasn't a joke. We'd always been the just roommates type. Two guys thrown together by chance, sharing a cramped apartment near downtown, surviving on takeout and sarcasm. Mark was the steady one, always organized, a little intense about his day job at the marketing firm, and weirdly obsessed with 90s sitcom reruns. Me? I was the scatterbrained artist, still trying to figure out if I could make a living drawing comics or if I'd end up back in some boring office. We were like yin and yang, but in a purely platonic way. Or so I thought. That afternoon started out like any other. We just got back from a long hike around the city park, dripping sweat and arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza, which, in my opinion, it absolutely does. But Mark is a hard no. After crashing on the couch, I was scrolling through my phone while he brewed coffee. The usual background noise of our apartment, the hum of the fridge, the occasional honk from the street outside, the clinking of his mug on the table. Then he said it. "I had a dream about you last night." I paused, caught off guard. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady but feeling my heart speed up for some reason. "Yeah," he continued, not meeting my eyes right away. "It was weird, but not in a bad way. Kind of nice, actually." I laughed nervously, figuring he was about to tease me or make some joke. But then he looked up, eyes serious, and asked the question that threw all my assumptions out the window. "Do you think we could try it? Like, us. You and me." That moment, everything felt surreal. I had spent years avoiding even entertaining the idea that Mark and I could be more than friends. We were each other's constants in a chaotic world. Safe, predictable. But now, hearing those words, I realized maybe the safety net was exactly what was holding me back from something I didn't even know I wanted until that second. I wanted to say something clever, or brush it off like it was no big deal. But I couldn't. Instead, I just sat there, heart pounding, trying to figure out if this was the start of something I'd been blind to all along, or the end of a friendship I never wanted to lose. The coffee shop suddenly felt too loud, like every clatter of a cup or murmur from a nearby table was amplified, just to remind me how awkward this moment was. I shifted in my seat, trying to find some footing, but my brain was running a mile a minute. "Try what exactly?" I finally asked, keeping my voice low. Mark shrugged, a little sheepish. "I don't know. Dating? Seeing if there's more between us." His eyes locked onto mine, waiting for a reaction. "I mean, we've always been close, and maybe that's why I dreamed about you. And when I woke up, it just felt right." Right. The word hung in the air, and I wondered if I could even remember what right felt like when it came to something like this. Because, honestly, I'd never thought of Mark that way. Not really. I mean, sure, we flirted sometimes, mostly as a joke or teasing, but there was never any actual talk about us being anything beyond roommates and friends. Or at least, none that I'd let myself admit. I took a deep breath and leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "So what made you think about it now? Why the dream?" I didn't want to pressure him, but I needed to understand. He ran a hand through his hair, fiddling with the sleeve of his hoodie. "I guess. I don't know. The last few months, I've been feeling kind of stuck, like I've been so focused on work and not really living, you know? And then last night, you popped up in my dream, and we were just together, like really together, not just roommates or friends messing around." It was simple and easy, but also different. I watched his face closely. There was something honest and raw there, maybe even scared. I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for him to say more or to backtrack, but he didn't. "Look," he said quietly, "I don't want to ruin what we have. I value you way too much. But I also don't want to live wondering, what if? So I figured I'd just put it out there. What do you think?" I swallowed hard, feeling this weird mix of excitement and panic, because the truth was, I'd thought about it too. Maybe not in the same way he did, but late at night when I was alone, I'd caught myself wondering what it'd be like to hold his hand, or see him as something more than just my roommate. But I'd always pushed it away, telling myself it was stupid. Now it wasn't stupid anymore, it was real. And it was happening. I sat back for a second, letting the silence stretch between us before I said, "I'm scared, Mark. Not gonna lie. Because you're my best friend. And if this goes wrong..." My voice trailed off. He nodded, understanding. "I get it. I'm scared too. But maybe that's what makes it worth trying." We stayed like that, the weight of the conversation settling over us. Outside the window, the city moved on, traffic buzzing, people rushing by. But inside that little coffee shop, time felt suspended. For once, it was just the two of us, figuring out if there was something new waiting to be discovered. A few days later, things were different. We didn't talk about the dream right away. Instead, there was this subtle shift, a brush of hands that lingered, longer looks across the room, a nervous energy that buzzed beneath our usual banter. It was like we were both testing the waters without actually saying it out loud. One night, we stayed up late watching old movies, the kind we used to mock but secretly loved. I was sitting on the couch, and Mark was beside me, his arm resting just a little too close. The room was dim, the only light coming from the flickering TV, and suddenly I felt this urge to close the distance. Without thinking, I reached over and took his hand. His fingers tightened around mine, and I swear, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. He looked at me then, eyes wide but smiling, like he couldn't believe we were finally here. "Maybe we should try this," he whispered. I nodded, words failing me. And just like that, the line between friendship and something more blurred, and everything felt possible. It hasn't all been perfect since then. There are awkward moments, doubts, and the occasional fear creeping in that we might crash and burn. But every time I look at Mark, I see the same hope I'm feeling. The hope that maybe, just maybe, the dream was the start of something real. And honestly, I'm glad he told me about it. Because sometimes, the scariest conversations turn out to be the ones that change your life. We decided to take it slow. Neither of us wanted to rush into anything and risk wrecking the friendship that had been our foundation for years. So, for the first week, it was all about little things. Casual texts that carried a bit more warmth, sitting closer on the couch during movie nights, stealing glances when we thought the other wasn't looking. It was that quiet, tentative phase where everything feels exciting and terrifying at the same time. One Friday evening, after a long week at work, Mark suggested we cook dinner together. He's not exactly Gordon Ramsay, and neither am I, but the idea of spending time, just the two of us in the kitchen, felt like the perfect way to ease into this new dynamic. Plus, I was curious to see how this us thing would play out, in a setting we'd always taken for granted. We decided on making homemade pizza, something we'd often joked about, but never actually tried. The apartment filled with the smell of baking bread and melting cheese, and for the first time, I noticed how easily laughter came between us, how natural it felt to brush against his arm or share a look over the counter without it feeling weird. Halfway through, I caught him watching me while I was spreading sauce on the dough. His eyes had that familiar spark, but with something else. Something softer, more vulnerable. "You know," he said, "I keep thinking about that dream. Not just the 'we're together' part, but the way you looked at me. Like I was the only person in the room." I smiled, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "You're pretty good at romanticizing things." Maybe, but it felt real. And I want to see if we can make it real. I reached out and squeezed his hand, silently telling him I felt the same. Neither of us said it out loud, but the feeling was unmistakable. That night, when the pizza was finally done, we ate it on the floor of the living room, leaning against each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was the kind of moment I'd never thought I'd have with Mark, and yet there it was, comfortable, warm, and full of promise. But of course, nothing that's worth having comes without its bumps. A few days later, at work, I caught myself replaying something Mark said during dinner. He'd mentioned that part of him was still scared about how our friends might react, or what it would mean for the group dynamic we'd grown into over the years. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but now it was starting to nag at me. The next time we saw each other, I decided to bring it up. "Hey," I said quietly as we sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below. "Have you thought more about what you said? The part about our friends? I don't want this to make things weird for you." He looked out over the skyline, shrugging. "Honestly? Yeah, it's scary. I don't want to be the reason people feel awkward around us. And I don't want to lose what we have if this doesn't work out." I nodded, understanding all too well. I feel the same, but I also think that if we're honest with each other and with them, maybe it won't be as big a deal as we imagine. Mark turned to me, a small smile playing at his lips. "You always know what to say to calm me down. Guess that's why you're my best friend," I teased. We sat there for a while, letting the quiet settle between us. In that moment, I realized how much I wanted to keep him in my life, not just as a friend or roommate, but as someone I could share everything with. The following weekend, we decided to tell a couple of close friends. It was nerve-wracking, no doubt. Sitting in that tiny living room, heart pounding as I watched Mark explain how we'd started seeing each other. But the reactions were better than I expected. Supportive, honestly curious, and maybe a little surprised. It felt like a weight lifting off both our shoulders. One afternoon, a few weeks later, I found myself lying on the couch, Mark's head resting on my chest as we listened to music. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the room. He looked up at me, eyes tired but happy. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought this could happen. Us." "Me too." I smiled and brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Neither did I, but I'm glad it did." He closed his eyes, and for a moment, everything was perfect. Of course, there are still moments when doubt creeps in, when old habits die hard, or when the fear that this could all fall apart sneaks into my mind. But then I look at Mark, and I remember that dream he had, and how real it felt. And I realize that sometimes, the scariest dreams are the ones worth chasing. Because maybe, just maybe, this is the start of something neither of us ever saw coming, but both of us secretly hoped for all along. A few weeks into this new chapter, I started noticing the little things that felt different, but in a good way. Like the way Mark would wake up earlier just to make us coffee, or how he'd send me a quick text during the day with a silly meme that made me laugh out loud at my desk. It was those moments, small and unexpected, that made me realize how much deeper this went than just figuring things out. One Saturday morning, we decided to take a break from the apartment and head to the beach. Not that we'd ever been beach people, but sometimes you need a change of scenery to shake things up. The sun was shining, the sky was that perfect shade of blue, and the ocean breeze was a welcome relief from the city heat. We found a quiet spot near the dunes, spread out a blanket, and just sat there for a while, watching the waves roll in. "So," Mark said, breaking the comfortable silence, "how are you feeling about all this?" "Us. The new us." I looked over at him, squinting against the sunlight. His expression was open, vulnerable, the same look he'd had when he first told me about the dream. "Honestly," I said, "it's scary sometimes. Because this is uncharted territory for both of us. But it also feels right, like something I didn't know I wanted but always needed." He smiled, nodding. "Yeah, I feel that too." We leaned into each other, the space between us shrinking until our shoulders touched. The world felt simple for a moment, like it was just the two of us in the endless ocean. As the afternoon wore on, we talked about everything, the things we'd never said out loud before, the fears we had, the hopes for what might come next. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were moments of doubt and awkwardness, but there was also this growing trust that made me believe we could weather whatever came our way. That night, back at the apartment, things took another step forward. We'd been watching some old movies again, sitting close on the couch like usual, when Mark hesitated, then reached out to brush a strand of hair from my face. It was the kind of touch that sent a jolt through me. Soft, tentative, full of meaning. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't even have to think about it. "Yeah," I breathed. And just like that, our lips met in a way that was both new and somehow familiar. It wasn't perfect, awkward at first with a few nervous laughs, but it was real. It was us. Afterward, We just stayed like that, wrapped up in each other's arms, feeling like maybe we'd found something worth holding on to. But, of course, life didn't pause for us. A few days later, I got a call from my mom, and the conversation took an unexpected turn. "So how's everything with Mark?" she asked casually, and I could hear the curiosity in her voice. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "We're seeing where it goes. It's new, but it feels right." There was a pause on the other end. Then she said, "Well, I'm glad you're happy. You deserve that." It was a relief, but also made me realize how many other conversations I'd have to have with friends, family, even myself. Mark and I talked about it later that night. "It's weird," he admitted, "knowing that people might see us differently now. But I don't want to hide what we have." "Me neither," I said. "We'll figure it out together." And that's what we promised each other, that no matter what came next, we'd face it as partners, not just roommates or friends. Some days are still messy. We argue over silly things, worry about what others think, and sometimes get caught up in our own insecurities. But every time we come back to this, our connection, our shared history, and the dream that started it all. I never thought a dream could change everything. But in this case, it did. And I'm lucky enough to be living it. The next few weeks felt like we were walking on a tightrope, balancing between what we'd always known and this new, fragile something we were building together. It was exciting, sure, but also terrifying in a way I hadn't expected. Friends who once welcomed us as the guys now looked at us a little differently, and every once in a while I caught Mark staring off in the distance, lost in thought. One evening, we were at our favorite bar, the same place we'd gone 100 times before. Back when it was just us, cheap drinks, and bad karaoke. But tonight, the energy was a little different. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, watching him nurse a beer, his usual easy smile replaced by something quieter. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I guess I'm just overwhelmed. Because of us?" He nodded, swirling the drink in his glass. "I mean, yeah, it's amazing, don't get me wrong, but it's also scary. Like, what if this changes everything? Not just between us, but with everyone else. I'm not sure I'm ready for all that." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I get it. I feel it too. But maybe that means it's worth it. If it's something real, it deserves a chance." He looked up at me, eyes searching. "You really think so?" "Absolutely." We sat there for a while, the noise of the bar fading into the background. It was one of those moments where words seemed almost unnecessary. Just knowing the other was there, fighting the same fears, made it easier to breathe. The next day, I decided to take a risk. I invited Mark over for a quiet night in. No distractions, just us. When he arrived, I could tell he was still carrying some of that weight, but there was a softness too, like the storm was starting to clear. We cooked dinner together, the kitchen filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and garlic. As we ate, I brought up the idea of being more open about us, not just with friends, but with our families too. Mark swallowed, pushing his food around on the plate. "I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. I get it. But someday, I want us to be able to live without hiding, to be proud of what we have." He smiled faintly. "Me too." Later, as we sat on the couch, I noticed the way he kept glancing at me, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Finally, he took a deep breath. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." I leaned in, heart pounding. "What is it?" He hesitated, then blurted out, "I'm falling for you. Like, really falling." My breath caught. I'd felt it too, but hearing him say it made it real in a way I hadn't dared to admit. "I'm falling for you too," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We smiled at each other, the kind of smile that held a promise to keep building, keep trying, and keep loving despite the unknowns. That night, we stayed up talking until the city lights faded and the world felt like it was ours alone. In the days that followed, we started making plans, small ones at first, to introduce our relationship to the people who mattered. It wasn't easy. There were awkward conversations, moments of doubt, and the occasional sting of judgment. But through it all, Mark and I had each other. One afternoon, as we walked through the park, hand in hand, I realized something. This journey, scary, messy, beautiful, was exactly what I needed. Because sometimes the most unexpected dreams lead you to the most real and meaningful love you could ever imagine. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon when Mark and I finally took that step, the one where we told my parents about us. I won't lie, I was a mess beforehand. My palms were sweaty, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios, and the butterflies in my stomach were doing backflips. Mark, on the other hand, somehow managed to stay calm, that quiet, steady presence I'd come to lean on more than I realized. We sat in my childhood living room, the same one where I'd spent countless holidays, family dinners, and awkward birthday parties. My mom had just brought out a tray of cookies, and my dad was reading the sports section of the newspaper, oblivious to the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, there's something Mark and I want to tell you." Mark reached over and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. I swallowed hard and blurted it out. "We're together." Like, as a couple. There was a beat of silence where every second felt like a lifetime. I glanced at Mark, who gave me a small, encouraging nod. My mom put down the plate of cookies and looked at me, then at Mark. Her eyes were soft, curious. "Well, thank you for telling us. I'm glad you trust us." My dad, who rarely showed his emotions, just nodded slowly. "If he makes you happy, son, that's all that matters." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, not because it was a huge celebration, but because it was real. They accepted us. Even if the conversation was brief and a little awkward, it was sincere. On the drive home, Mark reached over and took my hand again. "See? Not so bad," I grinned. I was bracing for a full-on intervention. He laughed. "Guess we both underestimate the people who love us." That night, back in our apartment, we sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below us like stars brought down to earth. "I'm proud of us," Mark said quietly. "Me too," I agreed. "It feels like we're finally writing our own story. Not just roommates or friends, but something more." He leaned his head on my shoulder, and I felt that familiar warmth spread through me. But life has a way of throwing curveballs just when you think you've got it all figured out. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from my editor at the magazine where I freelance. They wanted me to cover a pretty big event, a business conference downtown, with a tight deadline and a lot of pressure. It was a fantastic opportunity, but it meant long hours and late nights for the next month. When I told Mark, he smiled, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite place. "I get it," he said. "You have to do what's best for you." I appreciated that, but over the next few days, I started noticing the little signs. Texts that went unanswered, quiet evenings where he seemed distant, and a subtle tension in the apartment. One night after a particularly long day, I finally asked, "Hey, what's going on? You seem off." Mark shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "It's nothing. Just tired, I guess." But I could tell it was more than that. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, he pulled me aside. "Look, I'm glad you're chasing your dreams. I really am. But sometimes I feel like I'm being left behind." His voice cracked just a bit, the vulnerability raw and real. I felt my chest tighten. "Mark, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I made you feel that way." He smiled weakly. "I know you didn't mean to. I just miss us." I pulled him into a hug, holding him close. "I miss us too. But we'll find a way through this. Together." That night, we talked for hours about fears, expectations, and how to make space for both of us even when life gets crazy. We agreed to carve out time for date nights, to check in with each other regularly, and to be honest, when things felt tough. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. In the weeks that followed, balancing work and us was a challenge. There were late nights, missed calls, and moments when exhaustion made everything harder. But every time I came home and saw Mark waiting with that smile, no matter how tired he was, I knew we were worth fighting for. One evening, after a long day, I found a note on the kitchen counter. It was simple, written in his handwriting. "I love you. We've got this." I smiled so hard my cheeks hurt, because despite the ups and downs, despite the unknowns, I was falling deeper into this with him. Mark had told me about a dream once, a dream that started it all. And now, living it, I knew that sometimes dreams aren't just figments of the night. They're the first sparks of a love story you never saw coming, but but can't imagine living without. Months had passed since that first dream Mark told me about, and I can honestly say things are far from perfect. But that's what makes this real. Life with Mark now is a mix of late-night talks, stolen smiles across the room, and the kind of quiet comfort that only comes from knowing someone's got your back no matter what. We've navigated the awkwardness, the fears, and the unexpected challenges, but through it all, we've grown together. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I found myself sitting on the couch, fingers tracing the outline of the small silver band Mark had slipped onto my finger a few weeks earlier. It wasn't a fancy ring, just something simple and meaningful, a quiet promise between us. He sat beside me, his head resting on my shoulder, and I felt that familiar warmth spread through me. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought a dream could change my life." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Neither did I, but I'm glad it did." We sat there in that comfortable silence, the city lights flickering outside our window, feeling like the world had paused just for us. Looking back, I realized the biggest lesson wasn't about love at first sight or grand romantic gestures. It was about honesty with ourselves and each other, and the courage to take a chance on something uncertain. Because sometimes, the most unexpected connections can become the strongest, and the people you thought you knew as friends turn out to be the ones you want beside you as partners. Mark taught me to be brave in love, to embrace vulnerability, and to find joy in the everyday moments we share. And for me, that's more than enough. So here we are, two guys who started as roommates, who dared to dream, and who now are building a life together, one imperfect, beautiful day at a time. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.